Hello, everybody. Let me fix my audio. All right, I do apologize for the technical difficulty. Hello. Happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. Please let me know that you can hear my audio okay. In the chat box, if you would, let me know that you can hear me okay. I have some information to share today, and I want to make sure that I'm clear and audible. So please, in the comment section, let me know that you can hear my audio okay today. Welcome. So I'll wait a few seconds. I want to try to work through the technical difficulties and get all of that out of the way first and foremost, because I want to make sure that you can hear the information I'm sharing today. So if you would, in the comment section, put yes if you can hear my audio okay. I want to make sure that I am clear. I am clear on today. All right, and I'll wait a few seconds before I go any further because I want to make sure that you can hear me. Okay, so I see your thumbs up. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank you for that, Kimberly. Thank you for tuning in. All right, I'm going to move forward. And again, welcome everybody. I am super excited that you are joining me today. I do have a lot of information to cover, but I want to welcome all of you beautiful people. Hey, y'all. Hey, listen, I'm glad that you are joining me today, and I'm going to answer some questions for those of you who have questions pertaining to this very important subject matter. So welcome to this thought-provoking segment. I am Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. This is what I do each and every Monday. I bring you information, whether you are a landlord, a tenant, a housing provider. I bring information weekly to impact the entire rental community. I have one mission, one goal, and that is to provide information to make sure that it's clear and definitely relevant. Okay. And so today I'm talking about 3 effective ways to handle late rent payments. Okay. So, but one disclaimer before I get started, let me pull my disclaimer up. Information that I share is not legal advice. However, I am sharing the industry's best tips and practices. So, information today will be for landlords, it will be for tenants, or those of you who know people in those categories. All right. And today's segment is all about effective ways to handle late rent payment. So, any questions that you have, I'm going to answer your questions today live. If you're watching the replay, thank you so much. All right, listen, if this information that I share today is helpful, please like, please tag, please share it with someone else. And again, I'm super delighted that you're joining me. Listen, I know that you could be doing something other than tune into me. So whether you are watching on my Facebook, or my LinkedIn or YouTube page, again, welcome. Thank you. So listen, today, I'm going to unpack some strategies. I'm definitely going to give tips for landlords, but I'm going to also give tips for tenants. Because at the end of the day, I strongly believe that the rental community should be a knowledgeable system to make sure that it is equitable, that it's fair for landlords as well as tenants. And sometimes things happen because one of 2 reasons, either because people don't know or simply because people just don't care. And because I've been in this space, in the property management, residential real estate space for almost 3 decades, I recognize that sometimes common sense is not so common for everybody. I don't like to take things for granted. I don't like to believe that everybody is knowledgeable and know all information, because that is clearly not true. Okay, so let me dispel that myth. All right, so here's the ugly truth. When it comes to this subject matter, as I'm talking about how to handle late rent payments. Um, Landlords run a risk. Let me just get this in the way. Let me put this in the atmosphere that landlords do run a risk, especially landlords or owners who self-manage their property. They run a great risk of having tenants not pay their rent on time, especially when they do not have a system in place, when they are not doing the checks and balances, when there is not um, like I said, a system in place. And a system is a duplicatable process. You should be able to rinse and repeat whatever your system is. And if you don't have one, now is a good time to implement it. Or maybe there are some gaps in your system. Maybe now is a good time to tighten up your system. And even if you think you have a good one, maybe now's the time to make it go from good to great. And so I'm going to share some tips today. And if you have questions, I want you to ask your questions. So whether you're a landlord, a tenant, a housing provider, a owner, right? Whatever capacity you find yourself in, if you have questions pertaining to this subject matter, I'm going to answer that today. Because here's the thing, bricks and mortar don't pay rent, meaning that if there is not a tenant paying the rent, then that means there is no income coming in from that property. And there are definitely consequences when late payments come in. There are serious consequences, financial risk involved when tenants are not paying the rent. And what does that look like? That's what I'm going to touch on today. Okay. So, but the ugly truth is that in addition to landlords running a risk, it also puts them in a place where, let me just say that with the rental property business, there should always be financial stability, right? Especially if you have a tenant in the rental property that should be paying rent. You should be collecting rent. You should have a system in place, some sort of mechanism to make it as easy as possible for tenants to pay the rent. But now, what happens when you have those things in place and it's still not working out? Well, there are some things that you could and should be doing as a housing provider. So, whether you own or you manage property for someone else, you should have a system in place to make sure that you are collecting rent. And then, if the rent is not being paid, then what is the next step? Okay, so I'm going to share that. Because here's the thing, late or inconsistent rent payments could lead to financial strain. It could lead to financial strain. It could lead to financial stress, right? And it does impact that landlord's ability to maintain that rental property. And so this is so important. I know that this is one of the biggest issues that some landlords have, but it's a bigger problem because some of those landlords don't have a system in place to handle or resolve these type of matters. All right. And so the first thing is that when it comes to the rental property, like I said, there is a significant financial loss when tenants don't pay their rent, right? If there's no rent coming in, the property can't be taken care of as it pertains to maintenance for some. Now, I do know that there are some owners, those of you who are watching, you have the financial cushion and you still make sure that repairs are being completed. You make sure that pest control is still taken care of. The taxes of the property are still paid, the insurance and all of the, all of the financial obligations and responsibilities that you have, you can still do that. Well, that is not the story for everybody. Okay. Everybody just don't have the means. They don't have the ability to do those things. So I want to touch on this today because this is a pressing matter for a lot of people right now. All right. So in addition to the financial loss, if there is no income coming in, sometimes the property could go down because some landlords and don't owners, and I want to speak to tenants. I want you to hear me clearly when I say this. When you are not paying your rent, and I know that a lot of you do care, but when you are not paying your rent, it does create a negative financial situation for that owner or the landlord because they still have bills to pay. And the same way, here's how I like to tell tenants when I'm doing my training, my workshops with tenants. Pay your rent the same way you want people to pay you. Don't play with other people's money because they still have bills to pay. So tenants, I want you to understand how you not paying rent impacts that owner or that landlord. because it doesn't stop them from still being responsible for whatever they have to pay. And maybe you do have a good landlord that's trying to do the right thing, and they're depending on you to pay that rent. Some landlords are not Warren Buffett. Some landlords are not Jeff Bezos. Some landlords are not Tyler Perry, where they could afford to allow you to stay in that rental property and not pay rent. Some landlords are relying on you to pay the rent so they can pay the mortgage and they can take care of what needs to be taken care of at that rental property. So I do have some tips I want to share for landlords, and then I also have tips that I want to share with tenants. Okay. So the first thing is that when it comes to, as a landlord, as a housing provider, when you have tenants who are not paying rent, or maybe there's a delinquent balance, the first thing that you want to do is communicate. Send that tenant a letter right away. Let them know what their balance is if they have gone 1 month and not paid rent. Okay, so here is what I would suggest. Okay, you should have a system in place. What happens when the tenant doesn't pay rent by the due date? Okay, so let's say it's the first of the month and the rent is due. When is it considered late? So let's say the rent is due on the 1st, and after the 5th is when you assess a late fee. So after the 5th, any payment that comes in is now late, right? So you want to communicate that to the tenant. Communicate in writing. Let them know, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we have not received your rent payment. Communicate in writing. Have a system in place where you are documenting all communications. Do you have a file in place? Do you have a physical file? Do you have an online file so that you can maintain that information, that letter that you're sending out to the tenant? Because you definitely want to do that. And here's the second thing. When it comes to late fees and penalties, make sure that it's clear. How much do you charge? And when are you assessing a late fee? So let me go back to the late fee, right? Let me go back to the date that the rent is late. I'm sorry. So the rent is due on the 1st. After the 5th, a late fee is assessed. So that means any payment that comes in on the 6th, it should be assessed a late fee, if that is your policy. I know that some of you don't have those policies in place, but many of you do as housing providers. Stick to your policy, implement the late fee, impose the late fee, okay? But it should be clear. It should be in the lease. It should be in writing what the late fees are. There's nothing worse than having a tenant who, let's just say your tenant has been at the property for 5 years, never been late on a rent. Then all of a sudden, life just starts life, and it impacts their income, and now they're late on a rent. You've never specified it verbally or in writing that there's a late fee. And so now all of a sudden it's not in writing, but the tenant has paid the rent late, and you want to impose this late fee of $25, $45, $50, or whatever the late fee is. It could be a sliding scale. It could be a flat fee. It just depends on what you have in writing and what you're allowed to do in your jurisdiction. So all of a sudden you're imposing, as a landlord, now you're imposing this late fee, but it's never been specified, like I said, verbally or in writing. You want to make sure that whatever your fees are, whatever your penalties are, that it's clearly spelled out in that rental lease agreement. Please don't try to enforce something that does not exist. If it's not in writing, you cannot enforce it. If it's not in writing, even if it makes sense to have a late fee, if you don't have it in your lease, it's going to be really hard for a tenant to take you seriously and pay that late fee when they didn't know in advance that you would charge them that. And honestly and legally, they could dispute it. And they should dispute it if it's not in writing, if they didn't know about it in advance, right? It's not their fault that it's not in writing, and they didn't have a clue, right? And so you want to make sure that it's clear. And here's a third thing. After you've sent this tenant a letter, you've communicated to them, they know that their rent is late. They know what the penalties are. They know how much the late fee is, and they know when you're going to assess that late fee. Then here's what a landlord should do with a solid system in place. Take legal action. I have been in this space for so long, I'm not really surprised, but I'm still a little, I don't know. Anyway, I won't get into that, but I still sometimes I get landlords that will contact me. They say, Karissa, I've been renting to this tenant. They're a great family. I've helped them. I've gone above and beyond. I didn't take them to court, but it's been 9 months. They have not paid me. What can I do? Well, you can enforce your lease. You, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, can enforce your lease and take the tenant to court. I know that sometimes that is not what landlords want to do, because you want a tenant that's going to pay the rent so that you can get paid, so that you can run your business like a business, get paid because it is a business, because you don't have a desire to run it like a hobby, because we know that if you run it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. But here's the thing: when you don't take legal action, you are sending a message to your tenant to say that it is okay for them to stay in your rental property and not pay you rent. Your inaction is sending a negative message to that tenant that it's okay to not pay the rent. And I know that sometimes, as an owner, as a landlord, that you may not have the financial means to pay an attorney to assist you. Now, just depending on your setup, if you can take the tenant to court and represent yourself, fine. Some of you can't do that because your business is the rental property is in a business name. And when that happens in many jurisdictions, you have to have an attorney that will represent you in court. And I know that sometimes that's not always financially feasible to pay a landlord and tenant attorney when you don't have the finances coming in from that rental property. But I promise you that as long as you don't take any action at all, that tenant, just depends on their situation. Maybe you have a tenant who will get a job or get an increase in income, right? Maybe they got a new job. Maybe they were fired from a job. But in any event, they get back on their feet. They do the right thing. They pay you the money. They start working down the balance. Or you have a tenant that say, well, you know what? It's not my property. I don't really care. The landlord let me stay here for 3, 6, 9, 12 months. They have never taken me to court. There is no incentive for them to pay. And this happens more often than not. And so for those of you who have a heart, you decided that you did not want to go the legal route because you just wanted to be a good landlord and provide a rental property that's decent, safe, and sanitary. You wanted to provide a decent property that had all the bells and the whistles and the great amenities and stainless steel appliances, energy efficient appliances. You wanted to provide wall-to-wall carpet and marble tile and granite tile and all these nice things, right? But all of that costs something. And just because you are a nice landlord or owner, it doesn't mean that everybody is going to appreciate or respect the fact that you have gone above and beyond. And so those are the top 3 tips for landlords. So please make sure that you are clearly communicating with your tenants. Please make sure that it's clear when you are going to impose a late fee or a penalty and the date that you're going to do it. And please make sure that you take legal action, because sometimes tenants will say, listen, I'm working with a young lady right now. Her tenant, and she may be watching, her tenant has been in that rental property for almost 2 years and have not made payment. And every time the owner believes that this tenant is going to move out, the tenant comes up with a new story. Oh, well, I'm just going to have my attorney to contact you because you didn't make XYZ repair. Now, this landlord is like, wait, but hold up. You said you were moving January the 1st. And here it is, February the 12th, and you're still at the property. We agreed to allow you to leave and we would not take you to court. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it does not. I know that more often than anything, that does not happen, which is why I'm sharing this information. This is why I do this each and every Monday. It costs you nothing but your time to show up to get this information. All right, so now I have some tips for tenants. So I'm going to pause for a second because I have a large population of tenants who tune in each week, who watch the replay, and most of those show up on YouTube. And by way of announcement, now that I've mentioned YouTube, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go over to YouTube, find me, subscribe to that YouTube channel so that you'll be the first to know when I am live and online. You can find me there, Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Spann. That's me. That's where you can find me. That's where you can find all of the replays. And again, this is what I do each and every Monday, 7:30 p.m. I am live on Facebook. I'm live on YouTube, and I'm live on LinkedIn. So you can find me online sharing information for landlords on tenants on any of those social media outlets. So now let me go to my tips for tenants, because as a tenant, I want you to know that I understand that life be life and it's not going to stop, right? Understand that sometimes bad things happen to good people. I know that some of you are really striving to pay your rent, and there are situations that comes up. It prevents you from paying your landlord the rent on time. But here is what I want you to know and understand. If you are having any challenges as a landlord, number one, first and foremost, let me pull that up on the screen because I want you to see that. Communicate early and honestly with your landlord. Let them know that you're having a challenge. Let them know, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I don't have it. I lost my job. I had an emergency in my family. Explain your situation. And again, communicate early and communicate honestly. Don't make up something. Be honest with your landlord, because in many cases, landlords may be more apt to work with you because you are honest. They understand life happens. You might be surprised to know that your landlord may have once been in your shoes, that maybe they rented and somebody gave them a break, and which is why maybe they have a heart to help you, to hear your story so that they'll know what's going on versus not saying anything at all. All right, let me go to my comment section here. Hey, David, thank you so much for tuning in. You said, David, please offer your advice for landlords who have property managers who don't efficiently and effectively enforce late payment clauses in your lease. Absolutely. So for those of you who have rental property and you have someone managing it for you, it's important to stay on top of that property manager or that property management company. You want to find out what their policies are to collect. You want to find out, are they sending late notices to your tenant? And by what day of the month is this happening? And if you suspect or you believe that that's not happening, ask them to provide you with letters that they've sent out to the tenant, because you want to see what that is, right? So they should be sending late notices out. Anything. So let's just go back to my timeline that I gave. The rent is due on the 1st of the month. After the 5th, it is late. So by the 6th of that month, they should be sending late notices out. Now, it just depends on the jurisdiction, because some areas you have to wait until the 10th of the month. Whatever that late day is, make sure that property management company or property manager is sending those notices out consistently each month, the same time of the month, each month. Okay, so the rent is due on the 1st. After the 5th, now we want to send out those late notices. Have that property manager to send you a copy of that. How many tenants are delinquent? What actions have you taken to collect rent? And then go as far as having a meeting with that property manager or the management company every month. You want to know what the delinquency rate is. You want to know what they are doing to collect on that rent, because if you are paying a property manager, you are paying them to take care of the problem. If they are not taking care of the problem, you are paying them to add to your problem. All right. So that was a great question. Great comment. That is my advice, to make sure that your property manager is collecting rent. You want to get the confirmation. You want to verify the actions that they are taking. If not, does it line up? Is it in alignment with that contractual agreement that you have in their property management agreement? What are they required to do? If they are not doing it, then maybe it's an opportunity to consider replacing them, because they are replaceable. And I know tons of people who are in property management all throughout the United States. And I promise somebody is willing to take on a new contract if you need a new property management company. So have those hard conversations with your property manager to make sure that they are collecting the rent. And if not, what action are they taking? Follow up with them to make sure that it's done. Now, here's the thing. After that late notice goes out, right? So the property managers send a late notice out. At what time of the month are they now following up with a landlord and tenant attorney? What is their policy? So when you understand their policy, you can hold them accountable to what they are supposed to do. And if there are any tweaks that need to be made in the system, now you know where the gaps are. Just make sure that it's not a hard stop. Maybe make it a pause. It might stop temporarily, but make sure they get back on track to do what they are supposed to do. So thank you for that. All right, so now let me go to my next tip for tenants. All right, so the first is communicate early, communicate honestly, because some landlords are willing to work with you. Listen, I have come into acknowledgement and have met some amazing owners. They own portfolios throughout the United States, and they really have a heart for people, especially people in affordable housing, low income communities. They have a heart for these tenants. I have met owners who will agree to allow a tenant to vacate if they do maybe like a 30-day, a 60-day, or 90-day move out agreement. That owner would forgive all of the arrearage. That owner would not take them to court. That owner would not report that to the credit bureaus as long as a tenant agrees to vacate. Now, there are a lot of options that you do have as an owner. Let me just say that. But you just have to make sure that whatever your strategy is, that it's clear. So, as a tenant, please communicate early, communicate honestly, communicate any barriers that you're having with paying your rent. Let the owner know what is going on, because here's the thing. Sometimes, and I've had tenants who I've had to evict because I didn't know their situation. And maybe if they said something, I could have worked with them, right? But because they said absolutely nothing at all, didn't pay the rent, had no other choice but to treat the business like a business, because this is what I tell people to do. This is what I teach people to do, right? And so in treating the business like the business that it is, it's supposed to pay the bills, right? It's supposed to generate revenue. And so we had to take the tenant to court and had to evict them. And I promise that it's so heartbreaking for me. I do have a heart for people, but I understand that it is a business. It's heartbreaking for me to have to evict tenants who are mothers and they have kids, and to see those children's toys and belongings being carried out by the U.S. Marshal. I mean, the moving crew, right? On eviction day. That is so heartbreaking to me every time I see it. And I'm always in that posture because I was a teenage mom, right? I mean, I was never evicted, but I understand what it's like to be a single mother. I was a single mother. I was going to college. I was in college full time. I was working a full time job. I would leave to work an early shift in the morning. Then I was in college and I had kids who were in elementary school. And by the time I got home, it was midnight. So I understand the struggle, but I also understand the importance of communicating. So here's the second thing I propose for tenants to do. Make sure that if you are delinquent on your rent, ask your landlord to allow you to enter into a repayment agreement. Here is why you want to do that as a tenant. You never, ever, ever want to be evicted, because if you have an eviction on your record, it could prevent you from renting from someone else. Now, you could be a really good person, just maybe had a bad luck, a bad run, right? Your finances declined and it prevented you from paying your bills. I get it. Been there, done that, could write a book on it. But at the end of the day, you want to work with your landlord. Ask them if they would be willing to allow you to enter into a repayment agreement. And then to also make sure that if you sign an agreement, I'm going to pause on this. If you sign an agreement, make sure that it's number one, that you can afford. Don't promise to pay something that you know you cannot afford. Now, as a business owner, as a business minded person, I'm a professional. I am always going to ask tenants the maximum amount that they could pay. Now, it's not to impose pressure, but it's also to make sure that I am putting myself and that rental property, which is an asset, and I'm always going to cover my asset. Okay. I, I'm not going to force or pressure someone to pay something that they cannot afford, but I'm going to ask for the most amount in a repayment agreement as humanly possible. Okay, so it's going to be the rent plus a percentage of the delinquent or the arrearage each month. So let's just say the rent is $1,000. So I'm going to ask or demand the rent plus maybe 3, 5, 10% each month. But whatever you do, make sure that before you agree in writing, and it should always be in writing, make sure that it's something that you can afford, because if you miss that repayment agreement, then now you've given your landlord the opportunity to move forward, to take you to court, and to have you evicted. So please make sure that you are signing agreements that are true, that are accurate and honest, but inquire about those repayment agreements. Now, in some areas, they are required before the judge will even grant you an eviction or a writ as a landlord. And here's a third tip for tenants. Let me bring that one up on the screen because I want you to see that. As a tenant who is delinquent on your rent, please always explore any possible rental assistance that is available. Sometimes you have not because you ask not. You don't know what's available. You don't know what's available because you're not asking, you're not seeking, you're not knocking on doors asking for help to pay you, to help for someone to help pay your delinquent rent. Resources may be available, but you don't know unless you inquire. Don't be afraid to tell people, listen, I'm behind on my rent and I need some help. Even ask your landlord if they know some resources. Talk to your friends. Listen, I have seen a group of people come together and they have had rent parties to help a friend who was delinquent in their rent. You don't know unless you ask. And maybe some of you don't have those resources. Maybe some of you don't have those type of friends. I get it. But in many communities throughout the United States, there are rental assistance programs available that could help you pay your rent. Now, I do know that in some areas, such as Washington, D.C., right, there's an ERAP program, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. I know that many landlords know about this. I know that many tenants know about this. But here's the thing. With that ERAP program, in some areas, there is no guarantee that the resources are going to be available. There is no guarantee that you're going to get into that one program. So explore as many programs as possible. There are churches that will help. There are nonprofit organizations that will help. Ask for the resources, do the research. All right. Those are the tips that I wanted to share today. I gave 3 tips, 3 effective ways to handle late rent payments for landlords, 3 effective ways to handle late rent payments for tenants. I do hope that is helpful. Let me do a recap really quickly because I know that some of you may have tuned in late, but my first tip for landlords was to communicate, right? Make sure that it is in writing. If the tenant is delinquent, let the tenant know how much they owe, what amount they owe for each month, how much do they need to pay you for rent, how much do they need to pay you for the late fees. Your late fees should be clear. Tenants should know when that fee is going to be assessed. If it's the 6th of the month, if it's the 11th of the month, it should be clearly spelled out in the lease. You want to make sure that at the end of the day that you take legal action. You can take action, just make sure that it's legal. Also know, I didn't include this, but please know that even if a tenant has not paid you rent in 6 months, 9 months, 12, 15, or 18 months, you cannot just walk into that rental property and put them out. You do have to take legal action, which means that you will likely have to take them to court and allow the judge to make that determination. Here are my tips for tenants. I also advise tenants to communicate early and honestly. If you're running behind on your rent, if you know you're going to be late, communicate with your landlord up front They may work with you because they know your situation. They may be like me and have a heart to work with you. I also shared the importance of proposing a payment plan. If you're running late, you know you can't pay it, or maybe you just haven't paid it, right? Life is life, has been life, and things happen that's prevented you from paying your rent. You haven't paid your landlord. You don't want to be evicted. Enter into a repayment agreement if they will allow you to. Make sure that it is one that you can afford, and then also explore any type of rental assistance programs because they are available. They are in the community. At the end of the day, the government does not want people to be homeless. And so because they are really trying to end homelessness, they're trying to preserve affordable housing. They are definitely making sure that they're putting resources in place to help people pay their rent, to stay in their rental homes, because that's what it's about. All right. I do hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. I shared a lot of information today, but my time is up and I thank you for yours. This is what I do each and every Monday. I'm live. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on YouTube, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm sharing information for landlords. I'm sharing information for tenants because I recognize the importance of making sure that the rental community is an educated community, trying to positively bring about change and just go right down the aisle, which is why I always give tips for both sides, landlords as well as tenants. All right, so are there any last minute questions, any comments, any remarks, any observations? And again, thank you so much. Who was that? David, who had the comment. You wanted advice. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for tuning in, Kim. Thank you for tuning in, Lynette. I do appreciate each and every one of you. Please make sure that if you found any value in the information that I shared today, like, tag, share it with someone else. Please do that. Get this information to somebody who needs it. Maybe you don't need it, but I'm sure you know someone who does, whether they are a landlord or a tenant, whether you are a new landlord, inexperienced landlord, new seasoned landlord, whether you are a new tenant or you think or you know that you're going to become a tenant. Make sure that you're tuning in each and every week. This is where you can find me: Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I am Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert, and it's been a pleasure to share this information and to share this time with you. If you have any questions for me, let me give you my email address. I want to make sure that if you need to reach me, you can reach me. You can find me online, but when I'm not online, that's my email address right there: info@landlordlife.com. info@landlordlife.com. Listen, for those of you who have decided to join me for landlord coaching, please go to my website, landlordlife.com. I do offer coaching and training for landlords. And this is what I do. I'm an educator. I teach property management. It's an absolute joy to help bring about a change. All right. Thank you so much for that. I look forward to seeing you all next week. And again, please feel free to email me. See you all next week. Bye for now.